I would come to town with Granddad after I was a little bigger. And where we have the museum now, I remember going there to that store with him. And of course I went to high school with the grandson of that family in later years. But the ice house, I don't recall ever going there when I was small. But I know he did come and get ice. And all the orphaned grandchildren, in other words, one parent was gone, they all came and stayed the weekend with us. And I remember the Warren kids, and that was St. Nettie's three, their aunt, Bernard Warren, who became Jack Ernie's sister-in-law in later years. But anyway, she made them nightgowns out of flour sacks that she'd bleached out. And just with the sewing machine, she sewed their initial on the tail of their gown. So we wouldn't have any problem with that. And we always looked forward to the ice cream. And it was made in a syrup bucket.
What kind of bucket?
See, that's the reason I can't believe you don't know these things. In the fall, everywhere that I ever went, there was one person in the neighborhood that had a syrup mill. And everybody raised sorghum cane and ribbon cane. And then everybody came there and made their syrup. And you had a grinder that would grind the juice out. And it would drip down into this pan. Was bigger than this table, a little wider, I think, and maybe longer. And there was walls built up with rocks or brick. And the fire was under there, and you cooked it until it was done, whatever that was. Well, you mixed up your ice cream and put in the gallon bucket.
Well, what did you put in your ice cream?
Milk and sugar and flavoring if you had it, everybody didn't have, and eggs. And you beat up the eggs real good, but you didn't cook it in those days, which meant that it melted quicker. But anyway, you sit there and turn that, and you put salt.
What?
The pail, the bucket.
Oh, you
With
turn the
pail,
bucket around.
Yeah.
Use the, just.
Oh, and just turn it around.
Turn it back and forth like.
You
You usually
probably took turns.
You usually put a spoon in the bucket.
That was the ladle.
That kind of stirred it a little as you turned it. But every so often you had to get the ice off the top and be sure that there wasn't any salt there. And then you opened it and took a knife and prised the cream loose from where it had frozen to the bucket. And that would thicken it up, and soon it would be ice cream after you'd done that about 3 times. The cousins got together, and of course you made pallets on the floor to sleep. And the same thing happened when we got together with other people for the church meetings. And sometimes they lasted 2 weeks. And that is a lot of getting together. And I don't know how they did it.
I was going to ask you how.
Because there was no refrigeration. Of course, I know sometimes they killed a young beef and cooked it for the whole crowd. Well, you have a tremendous amount of singing, and then you have preaching in the morning until everybody has preached. And then when you get through with that, by the time you cook something to eat for the evening meal and get the kids' faces washed and such, it's time for the evening service. And so it just went on and on and on. But that was the social life of people in those days. That was the only time you really got together.
That's why they get them together.
A lot of courting going on, I know.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, a bunch of people met each other and met their future
Yeah.
wives and husbands, I bet you, during that time.
Yeah, they did. That's just the way it was.
Didn't want this to dry out. Sorry.
And then another thing we had was summer singing schools. And we had them at Carroll Springs and Union. Of course, they had them a lot of other places, but that's where we went. And I know...
Singing lessons? Is that what you're saying? Singing schools?
Singing school. And we had,
What does that mean?
we had a man, and usually his wife, and sometimes other relatives, and they taught us to read music and practice singing, and they did it in groups, in trios, duets, solos, and at the end of school, everybody that had attended school had to sing a solo. And I was terrified to death. I think I was, well, Aunt Bonnie married when I was 7, Betty's mother. So it was the summer before that, at least. And she was so picky about, I couldn't have a wrinkle or any dirt on my shoe. And my hair had to be just perfect. And then she and Uncle Major and my mother, and I don't know how many more of the children had natural musical talent. They did it all by ear. I couldn't do that. I had to learn. And I was terrified to do that because I knew I couldn't do it perfect. And I knew she wanted me to do it perfect. Well, anyway, somebody made a fuss over it and said I did good, so I doubt it.
Do you remember what you sang?
But then when I came to high school, I never did any singing. The reason I didn't, Aunt Bonnie played the organ. Uncle Major, and Betty didn't know that. And Uncle Major played the violin. And on Sunday afternoon, young people from Carroll Springs and Union would come to our house. And they would play and sing and have fun all Sunday afternoon. And I was allowed to watch. But every time I touched that organ, I wanted to see if I could learn. She would laugh at me because I couldn't do it right. And I quit. I never touched it again. I never tried to sing. But
Amy laughed at you?
oh, she always did. She would come out to the playhouse.
I didn't think she
Made
ever
her
laughed.
laugh.
I can't believe she laughed, but she wasn't a laughing person. But
Well, I'll tell you what,
But I couldn't believe she played one.
yeah, that.
she was the best dressed woman in the county. Well, Aunt Bonnie was an expert seamstress.
But was he talking about brass fields?
I imagine.
I think
I think so. I think he was talking about brass fields.
Aunt Nora was an accomplished seamstress too. Only thing she liked everything decorated. I can't remember a woman in Carroll Springs or Union either that ever had anything more on their dress than just a plain collar of the same material and buttons to button it up. Aunt Nora decorated it. She made her clothes, and they had to be
She
perfect.
made a lot of my clothes.
And everything had to be perfect, but everybody admired and complimented her and me because my clothes were pretty too. And no other kids had clothes like mine. But you see, I didn't realize that. And years later, we were living in Houston, and we came home on vacation and went to Carroll Springs to something. I guess it must have been the Memorial Day. Anyway, Edwin Mathis, whose sister was my best friend all through school, and he was a little older than we were. He came up and he knew Reba. He'd known him a long time. And he said to Reba, "I'm going to hug Floy's neck." She wouldn't let me when we were in school, because we were grade school. I said, "Well, I didn't know you wanted to. I might go down." And that just tickled him to death. But anyway, as we talked, he said, "We always knew that Floy was too good for us." He's talking about the boys out there. And that she would do things that we couldn't do. And that made me feel so bad. What happened to make them think that? Church life was our social life. Except when I never went to parties except with Aunt Fanny on her dates. If I did everything just right, I could go with her on her dates. And other than that, we just didn't have any entertainment except church. But after we were, I guess I was 12 years old maybe, we would ask Aunt Nora and Uncle Barry to give us a party. Now, one of the Costello girls, which was Reba's cousin, I didn't know him at the time, but I knew them. She'd come down and spend the week with me. And she'd say, "Let's walk over to Aunt Nora's and see if they'll give us a party." Well, that was 3 miles, but we would just walk off there. And it might be Saturday, just before noon when we'd get there. Yeah, they'd give us a party. Uncle Barry goes out and hooks the mules to the wagon, and he drives all over the community and tells everybody to come to their house that night because we're having a party. And while he's doing that, Aunt Nora's baking pies, cake, and cookies. And they make coffee and have hot chocolate. Well, they take the beds down, put them out on the back porch, put chairs around the wall with a boxing plank from one chair to the next, cover it with quilts, places for everybody to sit. And the grown-ups come as well as, and little kids too. And I remember one in particular, Grandma Hanks, which was related to the Miller family. Anyway, Aunt Nora always fixed something that most other people couldn't afford to. But she had made this enormous banana pudding. And she made the filling thin enough that when she covered the top with the cookies and put that over it, they looked almost like egg yolks, you know. And I remember Grandma Hanks coming by, and she didn't say Nora. She said, "Nora, how did you fix them eggs?"
Fixed him eggs.
She'd had her second helping. She thought it was so good. But anyway, Uncle Barry played the juice harp. And
What's that?
Stick it in your mouth and you twang it.
and harmonica, he could do that too. And he had both. We could not call it dancing because they didn't give dances. It was a party. And they called it ring plays. We had the music and we square danced. But it was called a ring play. We didn't have firecrackers and fireworks and all sorts of things, but Aunt Nora would take old socks, or sometimes she would just wind twine when you unraveled feed bags and things like that, and she'd make a ball about that big. Well, come the 4th of July or New Year's or something, they would soak that in kerosene. And Uncle Barry had some kind of gloves, I guess they were leather, or they were kind of stiff. And he would get out there and take that ball out and light it and throw it as far as he could up in the air. Just the most fun. I look forward to that.
Did you set the woods on fire?
Yeah, really?
No.
That sounds kind of dangerous.
Was just out there in the
Yeah,
field
yeah.
back of their house.
They didn't have a blade of grass in their yard either.
No. Allison Asbury Bricefield, and she was Laura Thompson. And both of them had a pretty good sized family. His mother died when he was born. He was spoiled, and he remained that way all his life. One of the things that I remember that I just think is so terrible, always did. Grandmother, we didn't have too many laying hens, but she would save the well-shaped eggs and mark them with a pencil. So be sure not to cook those. And when she would get 15, she would, if a hen was setting, she'd put them under her. One afternoon, nearly sundown, she and I went out. She put the eggs in her apron and carried them out, put them under the hen. Granddad was sitting on the porch. We got back and sat down, and he looked up at her and he said, "Laura, I just took me a notion. I want a mess of eggs for supper." She just got up out of that chair, went back out there and got them. But she only got half a dozen, and she scrambled them for him. And she tried to get me to eat some. I wouldn't. I think I was thinking about the baby chicks we might have had. But she left the others, and as she could, she added one every day or two until she had 15. I enjoyed going with my granddad to the store, and I often did. The one thing he did, if we drove over to Pointer to get groceries, he would always buy a can of sardines, a package of crackers. I think they got them out in the barrel, but anyway, we had crackers, and peppermint candy. And one day we went, and it was near Christmas time. And when he finished shopping, he didn't buy much, except necessities. They said, "Well, we're having a drawing after a while. Put your name in the box that you might win." Well, I couldn't imagine winning anything. but I could write my name, so I put it on the paper they gave me, and it went in the box. Now, I don't know if it just happened. They always paid me compliments and talked to me when I went. But when they drew, shortly before we were leaving, I won. And guess what it was? A 5-pound stick of peppermint candy, about that long. I had never seen one that big. I couldn't wait till I got home. I don't remember that I wanted to show anybody but Aunt Piney. They lived just up the hill from us. And we stopped and told her about it as we went home. And when they came down to the house, we broke the stick and we had peppermint candy for them.
How'd you break it?
Hit it with a hammer. In most ways, I would say she was one of the finest people I ever knew. But she let me know when I got in the family that I wasn't quite good enough for the Millers. And she let me know that in many ways through the years. But at the same time, most of the time what she did would look like she thought everything was wonderful. But she never once introduced me as her daughter-in-law or her daughter or anything like that. She would introduce everybody else and she'd say, "That's Floy." No connection. That was just one of the...
So she didn't exactly own you, you know?
No. But her oldest son died suddenly when he was 10. And that was in November, and Reba was born Christmas Eve night following that. And he looked exactly from the pictures like his brother that died. And her mother told me, Grandma Costello, that Reba would have starved to death except for the rest of the sisters and brothers that helped. Apparently, she didn't even like to look at him.
It's too painful.
She could make a bigger mess in the kitchen than Carol.
No way.
Oh.
I always left it for Floy to clean up. That's
Well-
a fact. I've been witness to that.
Well,
So I love
Had
going
my
through
mo-
these.
had my mother been living, I'm sure I would have handled things different. But Reba tried all his life to please his mother. And I just supported it. Helped him every way I could.
They probably never bonded. If she was that way when he was born, did she ever warm up to him at all? I mean,
Yeah. About a month before she died, she was in a nursing home here. And we would go to see her every day because we both worked here in town. And I don't guess it ever entered our minds that everything wasn't just normal like it had always been. But we were there at noon. And, you know, if there was anything she needed, we took care of it. And when I got back to work, she called the store and asked them to get me to the phone. And I thought something was wrong when she said, "I want you all to come by when you get off from work." We usually went to the farm, took our sandwich, and went down there to eat, and then did some work. Well, we went, and she wanted us to sit down, and we did. And she said to Reba, "I want to ask," see, Reba had the place, the farm, They're his brother and sister's part leased for his lifetime. They would not lease it to him for 5 years or anything. They was afraid if he died, I wouldn't let them have it back. So they leased it to him, which was the dumbest thing that any two people ever did, but that's what they did. And I don't know why she had never once criticized Elton in any way. He was perfect from day one. He looked like the Costellos. That might have something to do with it, I don't know. Anyway, she told Reba she wanted to ask something of him. She said, even though it was already deeded to the three of us, she said, don't let Elton have his part of the farm when I'm gone. She said, he'll just poof it off and he won't have anything. And then she said, you could never give him enough. He always needed more. And see, all these years, she didn't want to give Reba anything. If his dad mentioned giving Reba something, she'd say, well, if we're going to help anybody, we're going to help Elton. And I don't know why. If she thought she wasn't going to live much longer, and she wanted somebody to take care of Elton. And when she died, Reba said, that's the only thing I ever promised my mother that I didn't stick to. But when she died, he told me, I'm going to give Sister and Elton their part. He said, in the first place, it's theirs. They can do what they want to do with it. But he told his sister, I'll release it if you'll buy you a decent place to live. And she did. But anyway, as his mother talked on to us, she thanked us for taking care of her. And she said, I would never have had a Christmas anymore if it hadn't been for you all and for Glenda and Marilyn. Because if we were going to their house, they saw that she was there. And they didn't give her an expensive gift. They gave her 2 or 3. So she'd have packages to open. And the others didn't even send her a card, much less bring her a gift. Elton sent her the Reader's Digest one time when he was...
Because he was writing in it, right?
Well, no, because he had a newspaper office and he got it for nothing.
Oh.
I just happen to believe that what we send into the lives of others comes back into our own. And I've been telling people for many years, I'm very selfish. I want a good life. And the only way I can be sure I'll have that
Has to be good.
is what I do for others.
Good.
And I have no regrets. When Uncle Major came home, he was in France when the war ended.
Cold War One.
And Daddy picked him up where the train came to Athens, I assume, and brought him home. And I remember Uncle Ruth was there. That was the only other brother living. And the 3 of them played cards and dominoes. And Granddad thought playing dominoes was a sin. I can't imagine what he thought about the cards. But you know, he didn't say anything. I guess they were so glad he came home alive. And since Daddy didn't come, but that one time, after we got in the fireplace room, I remember Granddad was sitting by the window. That's where he always sat, right by the fireplace, because he kept his newspapers right behind him. And Dad picked me up and set me in his lap and leaned his chair, just straight chair, back against the wall. And they talked to each other. No affection at all, ever. And when he had the stroke and couldn't talk, after I'd spent the time with him there was still no affection at all. I assumed that the rest of the kids had. And when he couldn't talk, he was using his fingers. He knew I played with a girl that had a problem, and I could communicate. What he didn't know was, it was phrases kind of like slang expressions. We didn't spell out things. And I said, I can't do it, Daddy, but I'll go home and get my book and see. I couldn't. That was not what I did when I talked to her. And he wouldn't know what I was saying. So our pastor's wife took me back over there. And when I got there, that was the next day, he said, he looked at me and tears running down his face, and he said, I'm sorry. And I said, Daddy, you're one of the fortunate ones. You live to know what you missed. And from that day forward, we had a good relationship. But when I was staying with him, when Jean was the baby, she just loved all little girls like men, you know, better than they do women. And she would try to pull up to him. He would not pick her up. He wouldn't pay any attention to her. And I was out on the back porch doing something, and he came out there, and she tried to get his attention, and he didn't pay any attention to her. I was 16 years old. We'd never had a serious conversation. I whirled around. I said, Daddy, why don't you pay attention to Jean? She loves you. He looked like I'd hit him. And he stood there for a minute and didn't say anything. He said, I think I can tell you. He said, one time, I lost everything I loved. And I said it'd never happen again. I'd never love anybody anymore. And when George came to visit us in Houston, he asked a million questions. He didn't know I had ever been with him.
Wow.
And I answered everything the best I could. And he just couldn't imagine that I had never been with him. And I said, well, I felt like I missed a lot. I just never had any affection. He turned around and looked at me. He said, you gotta be kidding. He said, you were one of the fortunate ones. He said, we never either. How could you raise a family? And like I told him, he missed more than we did. Because ours was individual, he missed the whole family. And I think the rest of his life, he enjoyed, probably, even though he was sick.
How long did he live after that?
He was in bed about 9 years.
That's how I remember him. And occasionally outdoors during family reunions, sitting in a
But you know, and a lot of people, I knew a lot of people that knew Dad. And everything I ever heard about him was good. He cared about people, especially his students. When they grew up and had financial problems, I've seen him come to the house during the Depression. He would not even, he's working down at the grocery store, he wouldn't even sit down at the table. He'd just reach over and get a piece of bread and put some meat or something between it. He'd say, I can't take time to eat. So-and-so, Bud Till or somebody had a sick baby and they can't get any money. I've got to go get them some money. He was kind. Now, he was firm in his school teaching. No matter how much he cared for them, he wanted them to get to work, and he was pretty firm about that. But he just neglected his family insofar as personal contact. And I now after he told me that, I understood why. I remember it down. She almost hated it. She said he didn't shed a tear at the funeral. I said, good night, that's the most painful grief there is when you can't get rid of it. Mm-hmm. And after he told me what he did, I understood. But I don't know if the rest of them understood or not.